Welcome to Regents Roundtable. I'm Stephen Ludwig. My guest today is Chauncey Lennon, the Vice President for Learning and Work at the Lumina Foundation, leading Lumina's community college strategy to expand access to high quality short term credentials and associate degrees. The Lumina Foundation is an independent private foundation that is committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. He came to Lumina in 2018 after nearly 5 years as the managing director for workforce strategy at JP Morgan Chase, where he drove the firm's $350 million investment in philanthropic initiatives. He previously managed portfolios at the Ford Foundation related to economic advancement and workforce development. He currently serves on the New York City Workforce Development Board, the board of Neighborhood Trust Financial Partners, a leading provider of innovative financial coaching services for workers, and he is a board observer for two education technology firms. Chauncey holds a doctorate in anthropology from Columbia University. Chauncey, thanks so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, can you explain for people that might not know about Lumina a little bit more about what Lumina does?
Sure. You got part of it, which is that we are one of the largest foundations in the U.S. that's focused on post-secondary attainment. All the things that we want to have happen after high school. But what also makes us stand out is that we're the rare foundation that's organized our work around a single time-limited quantitative goal. So if you know Lumina, you all know that we are focused on goal 2020-25, which is getting 60% of adults a credential of value by 2020-25. And so that really drives a lot of our work because we are thinking always about how what we do is helping push the nation, states across the nation towards increasing attainment, and it was both driven by quality and by equity.
That's great. And a lot of regents and trustees that are new to the higher ed space might not know about you, so that's a great background and foundation in that. Who does Lumina typically engage with on a college or university campus? And is that the more normal route for most philanthropies? Because as a board, we're not going to reach out to you probably, but somebody in the administration or
Right.
faculty will. So who's reaching out to you and who are you working with?
Sure. So I think it's a great question because I think sometimes people hear philanthropy and they think, oh, maybe there's dollars there for scholarships for students. Well, that is obviously critical and very important to the world of post-secondary education. That's not what we are actually funding what we could broadly describe as opportunities for systems change. So we tend to work with either state system leaders, state education leads, the SHIOs, or we often work with the systems. So the heads of state community college systems, the state regional systems. And then when we do work with individual schools, we tend to work in sort of cohorts. So many of our projects will involve a cohort of 20 or 30 or 40 different schools who've all come together to focus on a particular, and we are working with them as that large group because again, we're really thinking about how our investments can help drive attainment numbers. We're humble. We recognize that we alone will not actually be able to push attainment numbers and the direction we want to see them go. We feel like our investments in the field of higher education can really help mobilize all the various stakeholders who are able to make the kind of changes, make the kind of choices that create opportunities for all students to enroll, to persist, and to complete.
You mentioned SHIO. That's a state higher education
Or,
officers.
the state higher education offers. That's right.
Okay. And then what kind of numbers, and I know that's going to be from small to big, but when you get involved in systems change, what are your typical grants?
Oh, sure. So our grants, and it's tricky because, of course, any one grant may be part of a constellation of grants. So sometimes we have projects and we'll make $1 million, a $2 million grant to an intermediary. Again, that could be
Mhm.
the state higher ed system. That could be, a sector association. And we have worked closely with the whole alphabet soup of higher ed sector associations in one way or another. But those dollars go partly to them for their kind of capacity to create the network and run the network and provide technical assistance, but often the dollars are passing through to specific schools. So our average grant size probably runs about north of $300,000-400,000, but that number alone doesn't really tell you as much as you'd want it to, because it's really about the project. What is the kind of project you're doing, and the way the grants are allocated can vary quite a bit.
Yeah. What's your particular role helping the community college strategy? What are you doing in particular?
Right. So, when we think about this question of attainment, we think about the kind of lay of the land as it is now, right? So we have a world in which we need to focus on attainment for BAs, right? We need to make sure that every young person, every non-traditional student who wants a BA is given the access, given the support, and the sort of institutional situation that will allow them to complete. But we also know that if we focused alone on the students who get BAs, we are leaving aside, we're ignoring the millions of students who their next step in credentialing will not be a BA, right? So we have 40 million adults with some college, no credential. We've got 50 million plus adults whose highest credential is a high school diploma. And we want as many of them as possible to get a BA. Many of them will not. And so we need to think about, where are they going to go for that next credential? And they're going to go by and large to community colleges. And when they go, they're looking for something that's going to be affordable, something that's going to be flexible, and something that's going to be tied to a job and an occupation. And so our focus with community colleges is thinking about how we can help the system at large to really be better positioned to deliver on the promise that it can offer to these, close to 100 million adults. Let me just say one more word about. So we have three different kinds of core strategies. So one of them is around building better quality capacity, especially on the sort of certificate and certification and occupational AA side of the institution. We have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of programs that are designed around specific kind of credentials, whether that's in healthcare or manufacturing or transportation, logistics. The list goes on and on. If you know the world of community colleges, many of these programs can provide tremendous mobility and opportunity for families. And so we look at more of those good ones. So we have a strategy which is dedicated to creating more of what we call more employment-aligned credential programs. That's something that really have to do in partnership with employers and industry to make sure that we're designing the programs to help students access the skills that are in demand. So that's kind of the capacity strategy. The next strategy is really about the enrollment challenge we're seeing. Even before COVID, adult enrollment in community colleges was ticking down. And again, we have these tens of millions of adults who are out there who could benefit from coming back and reskilling and upskilling. But for lots of reasons, they're not coming back. And so we have to think about, what kind of efforts can community colleges be making to do a better job at engaging students, in particular adult students, and in particular, low-income adult students of color. And so we've been investing in a lot of work that's around community college branding, community college marketing, helping community colleges to tell their story in a way that will help these adults, sort of get over what is often the kind of intention. Well, I want to go back, but there's a gap between what your intentions are and what ends up happening. And then the third strategy, and these are all meant to be kind of complementary, is it's one thing to build better quality capacity. It's another thing to encourage and help bring back the adults who could benefit the most from additional credentials. But of course, if people come and they don't persist and they don't complete, we haven't succeeded. So we have a student success strategy, which is thinking about the kinds of innovations that we want to see in community colleges that will improve persistence and completion rates. And again, with a focus on what that would look like for low-income adults of color, but with the idea that if we can make the system work for low-income adults of color, it'll be a better system for everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I went to two community colleges, and I did go on to earn a BA. Um, and it's just not sexy for a lot of people, right? The community colleges, people think the students aren't smart. They think the
Right.
students aren't motivated. They think they're underqualified. And my experience with community college students is, they're open enrollment, so you get a broad, but they're incredibly dedicated and passionate people that they might be broke, they might have to work, they might have family circumstances, they might be first gen, as you're talking about, like all those things. And I really think that they get a short shrift because we're so prestige focused in the
Yep.
higher ed
Yep.
marketplace. When
Yep.
it comes to branding and stuff, is that part of your helping community colleges get over that
Yep.
mental block that people have?
I think it's many things, but we've been we launched this project called the $1 Million Community College Challenge, which was about community college marketing, right, and sort of branding. So I think one of the things I want to go back to is your point about these are sort of universal access institutions. We never designed them. We've certainly never funded them to play such a proactive role in outreach, right? If you build it, they will come. That worked, or we could argue whether that worked or that didn't work, but that's
Yeah.
not the world we live in today. We live in a world today where community colleges really need to have the capacity and the expertise to go out and engage all different kinds of students and tell a story about the value that coming to those schools could bring to their lives. That value is not necessarily, oh, I'm going to get it. That value might be, with this certificate, you can earn, another $10,000. With this certification, you could move into another industry where there are wages and more job quality, right? We have to think how that story gets told, and we have to think about the ways it gets told, right? We live in a very different world of sort of media and communications. But again, I think some of the larger community colleges have had the resources and really know how to use a kind of wide range of sort of storytelling and outreach portfolios. Many community colleges, this is the last thing that they have money for, and the money they have, it's often the first thing that gets cut. So
Oh, yeah.
we don't imagine that there'll necessarily be a whole lot more money, but we recognize that there's a certain reality. Community colleges, whatever funds they have, they need to bring a kind of strategic approach to this question. They need to bring the kind of data that will help them tell a story about benefits of the various programs they have. They need to do lots of things. And Lumina's goal here was like, can we begin to create the kind of awareness about the different kinds of capacities that are needed, share our understanding of best practices, and encourage a more robust conversation with community colleges about what's working and what's the next kinds of efforts they should be making.
If I understand correctly, Lumina is an advocate for giving individuals college credit for workforce and military experience and training, which you talk about the community colleges, which is incredibly important, I think, to encourage people, as you were saying, like one of your goals is to, help people persist and have that count and some of the challenges. Why is it so important, do you think, for colleges in general, community college in particular, to allow that? And why are colleges, especially the 4-year ones, generally against it? But outside of,
Sure.
like, my first response is like, well, they'll lose the revenue. To be
Right, right,
generous,
right,
more generous
right,
would be faculty, or like, I don't know the quality of that material. Do
right,
we want to grant them a degree from our institution if I don't know
right,
what the quality
right,
was?
right.
So what's going on there?
Right. So look, I think this is I think an important issue, and I think it's important to sort of step back and really again recognize where we are. We have a set of institutions, whether we're talking about the 4-year system, the BA university system, and the community college system, that were designed for very different worlds, right? And we live in a new world now, and that new world now looks different in lots of different ways. we don't need to take time to go through them. I think most of the listeners are familiar with how our economy has changed, how our demographics have changed, who is actually the kinds of students, the lives they're leading. But the idea that you had students who went to this one institution and this other institution, there wasn't a lot of crossover, and the institutions would have sort of these sort of gatekeeping mechanisms like that model just doesn't make any more sense given the number of the needs we have to make sure everybody gets more education, and the ways in which we know that students are going to move from 2-year to 4-year and again sometimes, right? So but it's not, I don't know that we want to spend a lot of time assigning blame. I think we need to recognize we haven't built the architecture that attends to the kind of friction that's there because of the sort of historical, the legacy design of our systems. And we also want to recognize that quality matters, right? We don't actually want a world in which there is not a set of structures that are ensuring quality. So, when faculty raise those questions, I don't think the point is to dismiss it. The point is to say, all right, how do we design an approach here that addresses these quality questions, right? And so I think what we're beginning to see, although we need to see much more of it, is states sort of really taking this question on. Ohio is one state that has really invested in the kinds of programmatic architecture which allows everyone across both sides of the systems to feel like the coursework that's happening in the community colleges is going to fit in, will articulate into the programs, the majors at the 4 years. There's been the kind of groundwork to establish the right kind. That there's the right kind of curriculums, that there's the right kind of curricula, that there's the right kind of structures in place. But until we make that investment, we're going to face these challenges, right? The goal here can't imagine that, the faculty should stop complaining and that's fine, right? Or that, students can this is what they got to just, figure it out, right? We've got to, if we want to see more of this, we've got to design a set of policies. We've got to create the kind of funding incentives that will make it happen.
What's an incentive that would work? Let's take military experience, because
Sure.
there's a lot of great training in the military. There's a lot of great training at work. So how do we figure out, outside of making it? So as I mentioned earlier, when I transferred to a 4-year school, I got a lot of credits, but a lot of them were electives. I think I have a BA with 168 hours when you need 120, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we incentivize
Yeah.
figuring that out? Is that grants? Is that money? Is that policy? Is it all the above?
Yeah, it's all the above. It's let me tell you a quick story. I was just talking with a community college, and they were saying, look, we really want to be doing more prior learning assessment. We have a lot of students, especially students who are coming back for further education, but they might know 80% of what is in a class, but because a lot of PLA, for the reasons you just described, it's just like the way we think about a course and credit is structured in a way that there's no such thing as like, I can give you 80% of the credit and then you're going to go but you need to go do this other 20%, right? It's 0-1. It's either you PLA, you get the whole credit, or you get no credit. And that becomes a big disincentive for students who want to come back, right? So now I'm going to have to, I don't need that whole course. I just need, 4 weeks of it, or whatever the case may be. Figuring out how to design your calendar, how to modularize your course offerings that allows for that, right? We are going to have to figure out a combination of kind of incentives, right? Because it's work, right? It's nobody's job currently to do this. And most people, as I don't need to explain to the listeners of this podcast, most education administrators have 4 other jobs they're doing, right? So if we want this to happen, it needs to be somebody's focus. They need to have the kind of resources, and they need to have the kind of policy and sort of practice control that will allow for some of these innovations, right? And we need to make sure that in the end we're looking at the data to make sure that it's happening
Mhm.
in the ways that make sense. But I think we won't see changes until we begin to allow for this kind of experimentation.
If I'm a board member at any particular, it could be a community college, could be small nonprofit liberal arts college, could be a state school, large one, small one. What are a couple questions I could ask in this area if this is something that is a sometimes the board member has to bring up something like
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
If the
yeah,
school
yeah,
hasn't figured this out yet,
yeah.
what are some questions I could ask to begin the conversation?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I would start with, all right, so most schools are concerned about enrollment right now, right? So, well, do we understand why people aren't enrolling, right? Because some portion of the folks not enrolling are not enrolling because I can't get prior learning credit for prior learning, right? Like it doesn't make any sense to me, whether financially or in terms of time, that I'm going to go back and have to redo stuff that I already know, right? So if you want to bring students back in, you're going to have to figure out how to say to them, look, we're going to give you credit for what you've done. That you don't have to spend as much time, or you don't have to repeat work that's already happened. Now, you pointed out earlier, that is another kind of challenge here, right? So if the way community colleges in particular, if your model, your sort of business model is designed around FTE funding, right? That's a real
Mhm.
disincentive for colleges to say, oh, let's get someone through faster, right? Let's get them through with fewer credits, to say the very, very least, right? So, as a board member, I think one question you want to ask yourself is, well, how do we give the college the kind of leeway or flexibility to think about their program models from a kind of program participation model perspective, right? How do we allow for the kind of experimentation that is going to free us from, in some way, it is a real powerful stricture, the FT funding. Now, we're not going to throw it's not going to we're not going to throw it out overnight. We're not going to just erase it and start over. So, like we have to stop imagining there will be some kind of quick fix here. But in a moment of an enrollment crisis, you've really got to ask yourself, like, what are the alternative things we can try? Let me say one last thing. We know there's potential here because we look at community colleges, we look at what's happening on the non-credit side. That is a world in which uh, colleges are doing all kinds of experimentation, and they're creating all types of different business models, so to speak. And there's we don't have good comprehensive data, but a lot of the stories you hear across the country are of when colleges can get it right, and get it right means there's the resources, there's the alignment, the partnership with industry, there's ability to attract students, especially sort of non-traditional students or underrepresented students. But the ability for short-term training to lead to the kind of skills and credentials that get people into industries. So we got to figure out, all right, what are the lessons learned from that we can then begin to think about how is that a model for thinking about the whole overall institution.
Can you give a shout out to who you think's doing it well?
I can point you to some Lumina just supported a project, New America, on community college workforce programs. They just released 3 different reports that
Oh,
speak.
nice. That's great. What a great resource then.
So, if you go to the New America website, you can see, look at those reports. But there are certainly colleges around the country that have really taken sort of really important steps to how they design programs and how they ensure that there's a certain kind of, and they're often using the workforce side, the non-credit side of the shop to kind of do this kind of innovation.
You mentioned the FTE funding and how powerful that is for incentives. For example, when I was a regent at the University of Colorado System, I advocated for a guaranteed admission. So we had the guaranteed transfer classes figured out as a state,
Mhm.
which took far too long, and that's another story.
Yeah.
Um, and I went and talked to community colleges, all of them around the state, and they were hesitant to tell their students about it because they were guaranteed admission after 30 hours at a community college, the 2.78 GPA. because I didn't want to lose the students. And I'm like,
Yeah,
it's not what's best for you, it's what's best for
yeah,
the student. But
yeah,
I'm also
yeah,
sensitive to people deal with funding
right,
realities. And
right,
so
right,
that is a major thing. And I appreciate you saying, well, that's not going away tomorrow. One of the
right,
things you talked about the how the educational model, and you talked about breaking things up, is our current model is based on the agrarian system, the calendar, right? But it's also like I get credit if my butt was in that seat,
yeah,
right? And I took the tests or did the papers, and then I get the credit. Now, there's a new thing, newish, newer, that some people might not be familiar with, is the competency based model. Can you explain what that is?
sure. And I think competency-based education, or CBE as it's often referred to, that term is fairly elastic, right? So you can think about CBE in a lot of different ways. One of them in terms of this conversation is, what happens when students go take a certification exam, right? That's being offered by industry. That's them demonstrating that they've mastered a set of skills that the industry deems essential to taking on certain kinds of positions and jobs. And so, a lot of what happens in workforce training, right, is about demonstrating competency as opposed to, seat time, grades, and credits, right? And I think there is, I think, a whole recognition, and this is not just for older students, adult students, but for adult students in particular, who are, you ask adult students, what would you want about going back to school? They look, I want a better job, right? And so, for so much of our economy, a better job is about a kind of very specific skill mastery, right? There are certainly different kinds of occupations where, and there's different kinds of industries, where you need to have the degree to move on to the next step. And we can debate whether that's good or bad, but that is certainly the way those worlds are designed. But we often overlook the fact that there is, in many respects, an equally large part of the economy where it is driven by a certain kind of certificate or certification hierarchy. And so, there's no point to designing those classes in a way which says, well, if you in this section you only got a C, so we're going to move you forward because you got a C and that's a passing grade, right? Those kinds of skills, no, you need to master the skill. You need to demonstrate you've mastered the skill. So in the world of the workforce, that is really the sort of competency-based education can have a kind of broader meaning. Now, there's also a more narrow meaning around some of the kind of curricular design approaches, right? Which are again about what do we get from a system in which students can sort of stumble through with a low grade, but end up at the end having learned very few skills. So there's a span here, but at the end of the day, so much about what we're talking about training for specific kinds of skills for specific occupations ends up being a version of competency-based education.
Well, so a competency based education, if I understand it, if you use it in a more traditional setting, community college or traditional college or university, you can use it as a way to understand, like, a student struggling here, will give them more resources at this particular
Yeah,
thing so they can master that set of knowledge or skills and then continue to move forward. So it seems like if I'm struggling with a philosophy or something and I'm struggling with a
mhm,
particular thing, if we did it that model, I could get more help in that particular thing until I really,
that's
really
right.
understood it. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, I think obviously the world of kind of traditional grading is about a kind of performance against a kind. You're trying to measure in some ways something like effort, right? And tying effort to performance. When we want to think about skill mastery, right? Like we're not interested in measuring effort as much as we're saying whatever effort took you, like you just get to the place where you can show mastery, right? And the systems, again, it's sort of saying to the system, it's your obligation to help students get there, right? Like this isn't about saying, well, let's sort of array them across a kind of a range of outcomes, but as long as they're above a certain bar, that's good enough. This is really like the point of the design here is that people walk out with the kind of skills that are sort of needed for this particular role.
Mhm. So Western Governors University, which is a nonprofit, online only institution, no one's heard of. I mean, most people haven't heard of, although they're the
Yeah,
largest, or if not one of the largest, with 105,000 student headcount. They're all based on competency-based education.
yeah.
And they've been doing a lot of really interesting experimentation and what have you with it. Do you think others should incorporate that competency-based model, at least some course offerings? I mean, I like changing the entire curriculum. Wow, that would be very
Sure.
long, complicated, painful. But do you think that's
Right.
something you could put your institution should go, you know what, we're going to put our toe in the water here?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it's an interesting question. I don't claim a whole lot of expertise here, but I think if you look at what's happening at BA institutions, right? When you think about like their increasing focus on things like project-based work, right? Group-based work, that is just another kind of word for competency-based education, right? Like
Yep.
you've got
Yep.
to not just take a test and perform against a test, you've got to demonstrate sort of concrete mastery of a set of skills. And until you do that, you're not going to move forward to the next set of skills, right? And so I think we are seeing this increasingly as part of a kind of, let's just call it a sort of general, sort of a standard approach to post-secondary education. I think what you see in a place like Western Governors, right, is that you're talking about a largely adult student population who are already kind of, they're many of them are part of that 40, the sort of 39 million adults with some college no credential. Either they can't move to the next job in their office because they're lacking a BA or an AA, and they're there because this is again the most affordable, flexible, kind of job-focused option to getting that next credential. And that's a real benefit, right? I mean, it tells us something that an institution that's offering education designed around those principles is kind of as large as it is and successful as it is.
Yeah, it always has been a challenge for me how traditional universities and four-year colleges just ignore working
Yeah,
adults, and it's
yeah,
been from a public, especially the publics, like from a
yeah,
public mission point of view. My This is an opinion you can agree with or disagree. It's okay.
yeah, yeah,
I think if we did our job, the University of Phoenix wouldn't exist. This isn't a
yeah,
dig against them. It's saying if we
yeah,
had an
yeah,
expansive idea of
yeah,
what our role was as educators, we would have filled that rather than somebody going, "Oh, you guys are
yeah,
missing a big thing in the marketplace."
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
switch
yeah.
gears here. So this
Sure.
is a super hard question. When it comes to expanding access to post high school credentials through certificates, the associate's degree, low cost online programs, or what have you, are we setting up a two-tier system where the haves get to have a different experience and the have-nots get a different experience? And like,
Uh,
if I get a credential, a 4-year credential, a bachelor's degree from a whatever, maybe my kids will go on to something a bit more prestigious, but
mhm.
it's out of the ticket for me, out of the running. So are we setting up a two-tier system?
So obviously that
Or
is a question we should always.
it might already exist.
That
Yeah.
was going to be my first statement. That is the system we have right now, right? So I think the question we really need to ask ourselves is, how do we make sure that everybody has the opportunity to get more, to get more education, to get the kind of education that will allow them to lead a kind of, have a family sustaining, career. And I think we also have to have the kind of willingness to acknowledge that not everybody wants to get there through a BA, right? There's the kind of expense of a BA. Not everyone wants to spend that much time in school. Not everyone wants to participate in that kind of learning. Not everybody wants to take the kind of financial risk that a BA involves. We shouldn't have anybody who wants to do that who can't do it, right? So we need to, certainly make sure that everybody who has an interest is given what's necessary. But we shouldn't assume that by doing that, that means that's what everybody wants to do. And instead of just sort of imagining or sort of imagine the no, if I don't care what you tell me, you should want a BA. We need a world in which there are other kinds of pathways, other kinds of options, and we know that many students, that kind of post-second experience is not what they're looking for. Many students want to start, they're kind of thinking about their career choices in high school. They want to start gaining credentials. They want to go either, into right way into work and then be working and learning and gaining credentials and sort of funding their education through work. They want to go to school for just 2 years and then go to the labor market, and maybe they'll come back later. But I think we have sort of erred in the direction of saying there's really only one option, and that has never been the case, right? We've always had sort of more people without college degrees than with them, I think we've got to not define this as the people who do college degree are bad, or simply say they're not getting one because the system is unequal. I think the goal we want to be aiming for is a system where everybody has the opportunity to pursue further education. That education is quality. We want to ensure that the kind of sort of egregious sort of racial and ethnic inequities we see in those pathways are addressed. And so we don't, for Lumina, we won't be happy until where you end up, what path you choose. It doesn't tell us something about the color of your skin, right? But I think the idea that the goal here should be to say no, there's not. We shouldn't be investing in these other kinds of pathways is a mistake.
Yeah. One of the for switching gears a little bit, but it's related. From my time as a regent and as a student of higher education, studying the higher education world, I've come to believe that a major barrier for reform, either at the community colleges or colleges or university, one of the barriers to reforming higher education, making it more student and community centered, is there's this really huge infrastructure supporting the status quo. And Lumina to me is one that's poking, like doing the right stuff. Like, here's an idea, you're getting people together, here's some money to go do the right thing if you need it. But is my conclusion correct that this infrastructure is really tied in? And if so, how would you encourage, donors and board members and other philanthropies to kind of go, you know what, if we invested like Lumina is, or my own way, or whatever the thing is, that we could see some change. So I
Yeah,
know that's a big
no,
topic. Yeah.
no. Look, I think it is systems. Part of what they do is perpetuate themselves, right? They have a set of stakeholders who are going to continue to sort of do what they've always done. And I think we could invite a political scientist to join us here and talk to us about this is sort of how institutions behave. And what happens oftentimes is that gets further and further disconnected from the sort of realities of the world that we occupy. And we can see it right now. We're at a breaking point, right? Whether we think about this in terms of affordability, whether we think about this in terms of this sort of increasing sense from students that getting a BA or going to college at all is not worth it. Just go right to the labor market, right? The kind of the way in which the system worked, way in which post-secondary education was seen as part of a kind of progression through education into the labor market, like that's all sort of coming apart, right? And so the question becomes like, what do we do to sort of help this transformation take place? If you're lucky enough to be able to work at a place like Lumina, in ways that's what we're focused on: is that transformation, is that shift in systems. But that is not always. And one of the point I would make is that what if you look at a really successful business, one of the things they are investing in is R&D, right? They're always thinking about what comes next in the evolution of this market, of this industry, right? And for us to stay successful means we have to invest, and we have to kind of be constantly thinking about how we are updating and transforming what we do as marketplace shift. We don't fund post-secondary education, right? There's not anywhere on a budget which is for like oh, let's figure out the new model, right? Let's figure out. Now, it doesn't mean we don't see a lot of experimentation and innovation happening, right? The people running these institutions know in some ways they know best just what these pressures and tensions mean in terms of how viable their institutions are. But there's a set of dynamics which sort of make it very hard for them to kind of figure out and think about different models. Partly because they're not fun. There's no budget line for that. In some sense, Lumina and others are the kind of R&D budget that sits
Mm,
outside the institution. And I'm someone who believes that one of the best uses of philanthropy is for R&D on all sorts of government systems. And so that might be a cumbersome way to do it. That might have all sorts of other dynamics attached to it. But really, what I think of, the resources Lumina has, they're best spent trying to make these systems better and updating them. Because, of course, at the end of the day, this goes back to something I said earlier, we want to see attainment increase. The tens of $1 millions that we invest every year are a drop in the bucket, right? They are not going to do, they are not going to move many of those people towards attainment. It's the leverage our dollars can create for the system as it is to sort of solve problems and adapt. That's where the impact lies.
I always wanted to see a skunk works. So in business, for those that don't know, Lockheed has this group that they called Skunk Works that they sort of set out of the bureaucracy
Yep.
to give them a lot more autonomy to get things done. And I think it'd be interesting if, some of the universities that have gobs of money, although they always think they don't, to set
Yep.
aside and let some of their best thinkers go, okay, where I like what you
Yep.
articulated about where's the world going without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? I love the
Yep.
tradition of higher ed, but how do we begin to look at where we're going? And then how does an institution begin to do baby steps to
Yep.
begin to
Yep.
put those changes in?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
I
that's
think
not a
that's
question. That's a statement. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's right. I've been I heard a story recently about a community college. I won't mention which one. They had a great, I think it was a sort of a biotech program, and they were offering a certificate as part of the program, but they had to offer it on the non-credit side of the institution because while they had convinced a very talented person from the industry to come teach it, they needed to pay that person more than they could pay given the rules of salary on the credit side. Now, that is painful, right? Like if you attract, like, why shouldn't that be for credit? Like we want, these sort of high quality, knowledgeable folks to come be, lead teaching classes. But it speaks to this question of like what the non-credit side often is the skunk works, right? It is the place where colleges are able to try out different ways of staffing, funding. There's more of an ability to kind of be agile, set things up, shut things down, right? I mean, I think the plus and minus of traditional higher ed is that there's a tremendous amount of rigidity, but rigidity in some respects is a virtue, in many respects it's fatal to the success of the institution over time.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I want to ask you two final questions. One, is there anything that I didn't bring up that you'd like to mention about Lumina or how board members can think about anything we've talked about?
So I would say I sort of mentioned this, but I want to say it more directly. I think the world. If I was a board member right now, I keep in mind a couple of really important facts, which is that if we think back to the '60s and we think about the demographics of the U.S., it was a pyramid, right? And that meant we had lots of young people in the lower age cohorts. And the way that we sort of grew the economy was that those young people got educated and they expanded the workforce and we grew the economy. If you look at today's demographics, they're a beehive, right? We actually don't have those tails of young people. And so that's good, that's bad. It's a separate conversation.
It is.
It
It
is the
is. It
reality
is
of the
what it
case,
is. Yeah.
right? And we don't have much immigration anymore, and we're not actually increasing productivity. So we have committed ourselves to a huge experiment, which is that we are going to try to grow our economy through retraining adults, people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And so the question, you want to be asking about your institution is, are we going to play? Are we going to we're going to sort of stay in the terrain of 18 to 22-year-olds? And some should, so that's what they're great at. We got to make sure every one of those young people are educated for the future, because we need all of them. But the truth of the matter is we're going to have many more millions of people. We won't have enough young people, right? We're going to need to figure out how it is we design the programs for adults, how we get adults to come, and how we make sure that adults, succeed in these programs. And that is a big set of shifts for, as you said earlier, for many institutions. That's not what they've been doing, and that doesn't mean you have to do all of it. But I think I'd want to be understanding how my institution, if I was on a board, is thinking about this challenge and where they see themselves down the road as this becomes the kind of increasing reality of post-secondary education.
If I can't focus on mission and I just focus on budget, right? They're not always
Yeah.
separate, but sometimes. You mentioned 40 million plus adults in the United States have some college and no credential. Well, that's a huge market that's not served.
Right.
Maybe I could do something there, right? There's a bunch
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah.
And this is the last question I like to ask all my guests. What do you like most about working with higher and in higher education?
I actually didn't begin I sort of began my career more focused on workforce. The thing that really brought me to workforce is that we live in a country where, for so many people, almost everybody, again, and this is another for better or for worse, we think about our value in terms of work. And it is, a cruel reality that we don't actually invest in people in ways that allow them to go out and participate in the labor market in ways that bring dignity and income and the ability to support their families and participate in their communities. And so for me, the post-secondary education is sort of part of that. It's not going to solve every problem, but in a country where so many people think of who they are, the value of who they are, as tied to ability to work, if we don't, it's a kind of a cruel thing to sort of live in a world like that and not actually be doing all that we can to give people the opportunity to invest in themselves so they can go out and do all that they want to do in the world of work.
So for you, it's about helping people live a fuller life.
That's
Yeah,
right. And
that
really,
makes sense.
and by that aspect, I mean, again, personally, in terms of what Lumina focuses on, is all those folks who come to this with the greatest disadvantage, right? Who the system has served poorly, and in some ways, face the harshest penalty for not having the kinds of skills that the labor market is looking for.
Yeah. Chauncey, thank you so much for your time. It was incredibly a great conversation. It was really interesting and your time was very generous. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it.